Hello there, my Brony and Pegasister friends. I am Inkrose, and today I will be telling part 1 of my personal headcanon story on Twilight's parents. If you have not yet seen some of my past story videos, I encourage you to take a look at some of them on my channel. Keep in mind that this story is just my own personal idea of the backstory of Twilight's parents, and it's not canon. Now let's begin in 3, 2, 1. Celestia's School for Gifted Unicorns was a very prestigious academy. Just about every unicorn in Equestria dreamed of someday attending there and becoming a powerful wielder of the magical arts. There were 2 very special students who attended this school. Both were the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and neither could get ahead of the other. Twilight Velvet was one of these 2. She was the president and founder of the school's creative writing club. Her mind and magical skills were as quick as a whip, and she was considered the most organized student in her school. Though she was sometimes thought of as a bit snooty, she was well loved by many students. Her passion was in storytelling magic. With her horn, she would weave beautiful tales, swaths of glowing magic creating pictures to go along with her words. Her illusion and storytelling magic was so impressive, she once made even Princess Celestia weep during one of her tragedy stories. The other top student was named Nightlight. He was an expert craftsman, specializing in crafting magic. He made all sorts of things, from chairs to clothing to toys to even actual nightlights. He once created a beautiful stained glass window depicting Princess Celestia for the fair ruler, which pleased her so much it earned him a job of being her top stained glass craftsman. However, his favorite things to create were books. Bookbinding was his favorite hobby. During lunch breaks and snack breaks alike, he sat down, sewing up papers and inking in page numbers. However, he himself was no writer, and many of the gorgeous books he created were empty, devoid of life. Though he seemed quite shy and hardly spoke to any pony, he was still quite popular around the school for his connections with the princess. After a while, many students at the academy began to notice how perfect the 2 seemed for each other. After all, a storyteller needs a place to keep her tales, and a bookbinder needs stories to fill his pages. Not only this, but they were both intelligent young ponies quickly approaching the age of marriage. Whispers began to travel around the school, rumors of the 2 young ponies secretly dating passing from ear to ear. The rumors were false, of course, but they became so widespread that pretty much the whole school thought Nightlight and Twilight Velvet were perfect for one another. And then the story finally passed into the keen ears of Twilight Velvet. "What?" she cried. That's preposterous! I've hardly even spoken to the gentleman." Her best friend, Sundance Glimmer, who had told her the rumor, rolled her eyes. "Oh, but Velvet, honey, it's exactly why every pony thinks this. They know that you hardly speak with him during school in order to keep your relationship a secret." "But we're not in a relationship," Velvet huffed, putting her hooves over her face. "And you say the whole school thinks this?" Sundance's mouth twisted into a mischievous grin. "Are you sure you want me to answer that?" Velvet groaned, rubbing her forehead. "What am I going to do? This is a predicament I'd rather not to be in." Sundance put a hoof on Velvet's shoulder. "Aw, honey, it's all right. This is easily fixable. Why? Because this isn't even a problem. Why in the world are you so upset over these rumors?" "Because I hardly know the stallion, and it's quite frankly embarrassing." Velvet sighed, getting up from her seat on the lunch table and using her magic to fashion her school saddlebag over her back. "I'll figure out how to deal with this later." The school day continued, Velvet eyeing Nightlight suspiciously whenever she passed him in the hallway. She didn't really know what to think of him, or why anyone would think they were meant for each other. But she began to feel a twinge of disdain for him. She knew he wasn't the pony to take out her anger on, but at the same time, who else would she focus her frustration about the rumor on? At the end of the day, as Velvet was getting ready to walk home, her ears perked up as she heard hoofsteps approaching her. She whipped her head around, shocked to see Nightlight himself trotting towards her. She was frozen in place, not quite sure how to react. He strode proudly, his pristinely polished hooves glistening in the sunlight, and his eyes wearing a look that could be interpreted as either haughty or bored. His mane was carefully brushed and styled, a gel holding it together so it looked like a solid shining mass. Velvet never noticed how clean and refined he kept himself. She didn't know whether it was a good thing or a weird thing. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of her, his eyes boring into hers. Though Velvet still could not place exactly what kind of expression he wore, she felt like it definitely was not a positive one. "Twilight, Velvet," he said. Silence. Yes? Velvet asked hesitantly. "Do you love me?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Velvet felt blood rushing to her cheeks. What in the world could she say to that? Good gracious, she certainly did not love him, but she couldn't just say that to his face, now could she? "Well, you seem like a nice stallion, but I hardly know you. Even if I did feel the slightest bit of admiration for you, it would be baseless and foolish, as I've not even spoken to you save for this very moment." Nightlight gave a curt nod. "I feel the same way. However, fellow students who have talked to me during my reading time, which was quite rude, honestly, have convinced me that you are the most likely candidate to hold my affections. Thus, I would like to ask you to join me this evening for dinner in order to help us get to know one another." Wait, what?" Velvet stammered, her blushing reaching to the tips of her ears. "Here is the address of the restaurant." Nightlight set a piece of paper in Velvet's open hoof. "Please arrive by 5 p.m. on the dot. Thank you." He gave one quick bow and trotted away. Twilight Velvet stood still, her mouth wide open. What? What just happened? Did he just invite me on a date? A loud squeeze sounded behind Velvet, causing her to leap into the air, her mane standing on end. "Ah!" Velvet screamed as Sundance Glimmer tackled her from the back. "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh!" Sundance cried, a grin plastered across her face. I knew it, you and him and you." She squeezed Velvet tightly. "Sundance!" Velvet grunted. "Were you listening to that whole thing?" She tried to pry herself from her friend's grasp, but failed miserably. "Oh yes, I certainly did, honey, and I'm so proud of you." You've got to be kidding, right? I can't go through with this. We've said a few sentences to one another and he's inviting me on a date? This is ludicrous." "No, honey, this is an opportunity. Just trust me on this one. You should at least try this date out. You never know how it might go." Velvet finally managed to release herself from Sundance's grip. "No, I am not going to do it." She promptly trotted away from Glimmer, her head held high. And that was that. Sundance knew she couldn't change that stubborn pony's mind. Velvet made her way to her dorm, trying to keep her posture together as her mind whirled. She paused at the dorm door, fumbling as she used her magic to get out her keys. What was she thinking? She couldn't just leave Nightlight there at the restaurant alone. It would be very unladylike and rude. She unlocked her door and stepped into her room, setting down her bag full of magic books and getting herself a cup of tea. She sat herself down on a cushion in front of a large window looking down on Canterlot. She sighed. What was she to do? What was the right thing to do? Surely Nightlight was the one in the wrong. He had not even let her accept the invitation before he trotted away. How rude was that? Surely he did not think that was a proper invitation. Oh dear, thought Velvet. But what if he had been dreadfully shy? After all, he hardly talked to anyone and was constantly working on his own projects. Perhaps it had taken all of his courage just to ask her, and he had been too shy to stay and see if she would accept. Now that she thought about it, that did seem like the most likely option. She sighed in exasperation. She really didn't want to go to the date, but she did feel sorry for the poor stallion. And what kind of mayor would just up and ditch a social function that she had been invited to? Very unladylike. Velvet got up and finished her tea. She silently donned her favorite pearl necklace and dress. As she brushed her mane, she took a look at the restaurant's address on the card Nightlight had given her. Simple Life Bakery and Bistro. That was her favorite place to eat. How had he known? A thought popped into her head. Sundance, likely. She rolled her eyes. Now that she was ready to go, Velvet closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could do this. She could do this. Velvet walked out the door, ready to face whatever was ahead. Nightlight breathed heavily as he sat at the dining table, staring at the burning candle at the center. What had he done? She would never come. He had been much too brash. He knew he shouldn't have tried to ask her. He'd never done anything so risky before, and now he remembered why. He felt so embarrassed having left right after he gave her the address card. He wouldn't blame her if she didn't come and never spoke to him afterwards. Oh gosh, he felt like such an idiot. Suddenly, the door to the restaurant opened behind him, the little bell attached to the door giving a happy jingle. He looked behind him to see Twilight Velvet entering. He froze. She looked around a bit before spotting him. Both of their faces flushed as their eyes met. Suddenly recalling his manners, Nightlight cleared his throat, hastily regaining his composure. He got up from his seat at the table and faced Velvet, bowing.
"Thank you for coming, Miss Velvet," he said. "I am very glad you could join me tonight."
Velvet blinked and nodded. "Yes, thank you for inviting me." He offered a seat to her, which she promptly took. Nightlight then took his own. They sat in silence for a bit. Velvet was the first to speak. "So, it's, nice to meet you," she said, giving a nervous smile.
"You as well," Nightlight said. I heard from Sundance that this was your favorite restaurant, so I thought this would be the ideal place for us to share a meal and converse."
"Yes, I assumed it was Sundance who had told you. She tends to do things like that." Velvet gave a nervous chuckle. Nightlight gave a forced laugh back.
"Haha. She actually interrupted me while I was putting the last touches on a wood carving. She surprised me, so I accidentally messed it up."
"I'm sorry to hear that." The two were silent again. Velvet glanced down at the menu. I think I'll have the mushroom pasta with breadsticks. You?"
"Oh, well, I was thinking of having the same, actually. But instead of breadsticks, I will have a small salad," Nightlight said.
The two ordered their food, which was promptly delivered. Velvet took a few bites out of a breadstick, swallowing and wiping her mouth with a napkin before she spoke. "So I heard you are personally employed by Princess Celestia as a stained glass craftsman. That must be quite the honor. What's it like?" Nightlight raised his head, blinking as he pondered what to answer.
"Well, the princess is very kind. When I was first hired, she asked me to create several works to be fixed in the hallway leading to her throne room."
"Wow, really? I don't think I've seen them yet. What did they depict?" Velvet asked.
"Some of the most notable events from the history of Equestria, such as Celestia's defeat of Nightmare Moon and the sealing of Discord. I also made a few abstract ones."
"That's fascinating. You're very lucky to have such a job," Velvet commented.
"I must disagree there, miss. I believe you are the one who holds the most luck in this particular instance. After all, you were invited to perform with your storytelling magic in front of the princess, even making Her Highness weep from your incredible story and talent. I would call this a very lucky thing to have happened to you." Velvet smiled. "Why, thank you. I suppose we are both quite lucky. Getting to meet the princess is once in a lifetime for most ponies." "I agree. Speaking of the story you told to the princess, though, what was it like?"
Nightlight asked. "Thank you for asking. You see, the whole experience was quite exhilarating as well as bizarre." The two ponies continued to talk throughout the length of the evening, telling stories and sharing their interests. Though the first meeting was cold, they began to break the ice, realizing how much they had in common with each other. They talked for almost an hour about their favorite books alone. Nightlight explained his processes for bookmaking and woodcarving, while Twilight Velvet divulged some of her upcoming stories and showed her techniques for storytelling magic. After they finished their meals, the two bid adieu. "Thank you very much for inviting me to this dinner," Twilight Velvet said as she got up from her chair. "To be honest, I had no idea how this was going to go, but I'm very happy to have met you." Her soft grin made her face glow to Nightlight. Nightlight nodded, giving a small smile.
"I will also be honest here. I did not expect you to come. I acted so rudely earlier because, quite frankly, I was very nervous, though my face may not have shown it. I'm very sorry."
Velvet nodded. "It's fine, really. I understand."
"Thank you, Miss Velvet. I am relieved. Maybe maybe you'd like to join me in the library tomorrow? We could show each other some of the books we were talking about tonight.
Velvet thought for a moment. She smiled.
I'd love to.
When Twilight Velvet arrived back at her dorm, she could hardly believe what had happened. Sundance had been right, for once. Nightlight and her had so much in common. She was surprised to think that she actually had enjoyed having dinner with him. Well, once the initial awkwardness was out of the way, of course. As she brushed her teeth and got into bed, she began to wonder what was in store for both of them. Were they really meant to be a couple, as much of the school claimed? Or perhaps just friends? She didn't know. It was just too soon to tell. She turned off her light and drifted to sleep.